let's move on and talk about Steve Cotterill at Shrewsbury then. Now, we've used the words incredible work ethic a couple of times already in this podcast, talking about Mikel Arteta, of course, but there is probably nobody, Mike, and that I can think of who has arguably a greater work ethic than Steve Cotterill. This is a man who, was probably on death's door earlier this year with COVID complications and was in hospital for, I think, around 50 days in total. He tried to get back and then was readmitted. But throughout the course of his time in hospital, he was in constant communication with Aaron Wilbraham. There's articles which say that Aaron Wilbraham sometimes woke up to 50 pages of tactics that Steve Cotterill wrote at 4 a.m. from his hospital bed and sent over. He was on the phone every match. I think Wilbraham said he had 50 calls one day in a first half. Apparently Cotterill's feed was 90 seconds behind, so he never quite knew where he was up to. But this is a man who, even when, personally he's struggling, things aren't looking good, he's still living and breathing football, and it's almost like he's in the dugout.
Yeah, and it's this is his flow state in that it feels good, to just be. This is just what juices him up to be throwing himself into something. This insatiable drive and determination to get to the end of something, and I think it's just what's kept him going all the way through. I think there's no better thing to do than tap into your true source of what you're doing. And luckily for him, fortunately for him, it's something he can do from a hospital bed, because he doesn't need to necessarily be connecting with the actual players. He's not mind-body focused. He's more about video analysis and sketching things out and following templates. So this meant that all the time that, in his conscious sort of learning of the world, he had so much material to get stuck into in those Shrewsbury matches, watching them back on video, taking notes. This could all be done from his hospital bed, and all the time it was making him feel alive. It was making him feel like, I'm still doing my job from my hospital bed, and I'm still feeling involved. I'm still, got something to really get me excited day in, day out. So I don't think at any stage would he have felt fatigued by it. This was energizing him all the way through. This was keeping him going. This was, genuinely was something to live for. And it was, it's fantastic to see, really. And, also as well, it should be said that Aaron Wilbraham is a brilliant right-hand man for Steve Cotterill, because we're going back into, this getting things done, getting into action, solving problems quickly. Aaron Wilbraham's, we got to know his personality type as last season wore on, and he's clearly a logistics man. He's, very much about action and getting things done, and was able to execute whatever Cotterill was asking. It was no trouble for Wilbraham to, there was no confusion or complications. It's just a step-by-step how to get this job done, and Wilbraham would get it done. And it just meant that basically, it wouldn't be Cotterill getting this stuff done on the training ground anyway. So the dynamics didn't actually change all that much, and it was just the distance between them as they were doing it.
Yeah, and Wilbraham's first job in coaching as well, and it's been quite the baptism, hasn't it? But he's done really well. There's a really good quote actually from him. He says, "The second time that Steve got admitted to hospital with COVID pneumonia, I'd not heard from him for at least 3 hours, and I thought something was wrong. Then his wife texted me and said, 'Steve's been readmitted, but he'll call you later to discuss the tactics for Saturday.' I was like, wow, he's still thinking about the upcoming game." So yeah, like you say, he's everything's going wrong for him on a personal and a health level, but the game on Saturday is the most important thing in Steve Cotterill's mind.
Yeah, and it's just emotions. I think he's got a strong sense of his own internal emotions of what it's all about, what feels good and what feels bad in his life, I believe. And, basically by knowing what feels good, it just gives you direction in your life of what you should be putting yourself into, what you should be thinking about. Because, if you carry too many negative emotions, it can take you to dark places. It can make you, think things that are not going to be helpful in the long run. So just keep the spirits up, keep the positivity up, and just keep doing what it is that really gets you going and excites you. So that's kind of all he did. But to people of different personality types, you're on the outside looking in and thinking, you really need to slow down and give it a rest and stuff. But if this is what's energizing him, this was exactly the right, this was the right course of action that he needed to take.
And he released a video this week as well, following his recent illness. He's back, and it was an emotional statement in which he said he thought he let everyone down. So he was really feeling that pressure of not being on the touchline, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, interesting, because I wasn't aware of that. But, again, I guess it just comes down to emotions. It comes down to feelings rather than, it's not logical what he's saying that he let anybody down. But I guess it was almost the case of, he felt like he had a duty that he needed to be there. Yet within himself, he was still enjoying his own job. He was still loving his own job from his hospital bed or from home. But obviously, there's a sense of obligation, a sense of duty that you're the figurehead. You're meant to be there. You're meant to be. And I'm guessing that there was a sense of responsibility that he felt he was neglecting something, which is crazy, really. But, it just shows that he's a person that's run by his emotions and kind of understands, has a very, very clear idea of how other people feel about certain situations. And it might have frustrated him, or he might have sensed other people's apprehension about his position and where he was. So that might have been something as well that was playing on his mind. He's like, I've caused all this worry for so many people, and they needn't have worried. I was fine doing what I was doing. I was just throwing myself into what I care about most.
And I believe he's there on the training ground as well. Wilbraham will be alongside him, but Ollie Norburn said that he's never worked under a manager who's run so much in training. He said he was hurtling between the different groups of players and barking out instructions. And, whether he's well enough to do it or not when he returns, you guess he probably will be doing more of the same.
Well, yeah, if it's possible, absolutely. Fingers crossed that everything's fine health-wise now from this point forward. I also think there's a good point to make here as well about those Shrewsbury players and the experience they've been through with him now. I think and it bodes well for Shrewsbury in the sense that this could be the longest honeymoon period of all time. He's been in the dugout for a month, and he's just this all-consuming character now in the minds of these players. They've got so much respect for him, and it's almost like he's going to be coming back onto that training ground environment, almost like a fresh face around the place, and or like a new presence. So it's going to be like there's going to be no shortage of goodwill. His information's clearly good. His preparation was clearly good last season, even when he wasn't there. Shrewsbury were complete transformation in the second half of the season compared to the first. So I don't see anything but progress for them with him around. And there's certain quirks to Steve Cotterill in previous jobs that might have. I always see him as kind of a quirky personality that sometimes walks into a dressing room and players don't really know what to make of him straight away. And if there's difficult dynamics in there that might lead to problems surfacing and a bit of conflict or something like that. But I don't think there's any danger of that at Shrewsbury because of the manner in which that first season went and the goodwill that's already there in place for Cotterill now. Everybody knows he wants the best for them. His heart's in the right place. He knows exactly what he's doing. There's going to be no doubts whatsoever. And to achieve that in the space of 9 months or so, is incredible. So, it could bode really well for Shrewsbury.
So he might not necessarily, connect with players straight away when he comes in, but he does appear to be quite popular with former players that he's worked under. I believe he keeps in touch with plenty of them. When he was doing some work for Sky Sports, and I think he bumped into a few former players warming up, and they looked just so pleased to see him. Former assistants speak highly of him. Other managers that he's played against are always very complimentary, and the media as well. I've seen quotes from journalists at Bristol City and at Cheltenham and Birmingham as well, who say that he was honourable and he was respectful, and they enjoyed working with him. He always gave them what they wanted. So, this is a man who is very popular, and clearly, everyone seems to like him.
Yeah, I think this comes down to almost timeframes as well, because I think there's no doubt in his authenticity and just how genuine he is and how much he genuinely wants the best for other people and himself. But I think when he first comes into a club, the point I was making is he can push buttons a little bit and he can be a bit like, what's this guy all about? I'm trying to work him out because, even talk about, when he came back from hospital, lots of goodwill in the bank by this stage, but when he came back from hospital and he was first turned up at Shrewsbury, he was taking the mickey out of all the players, the way they were dressing and stuff like that. Now, if you come into a club without that goodwill and you're pushing people's buttons, trying to work out what types of personalities and what types of characters they are, and saying things that, like, you know, somebody you've just met start saying stuff, and these are the kind of things that can lead to a little bit of turbulence initially. But there's no doubt in his authenticity. And once you get past that initial phase of me getting to know you and we're all on this, you know, we all kind of understand each other, then clearly there is so much goodwill for him. And opposition managers as well. I noticed Carl Robinson was saying, you know, they went head to head for a title race a few years back. And it was evident that Carl Robinson's got a lot of respect for Steve Cotterill from, you know, locking horns in that title race many years ago.
And he tends to get the goodwill of fans as well. You know, he's never shy in mentioning how effective and how, you know, important they are as the 12th man. Obviously, for most of the season that Shrewsbury weren't able to have fans inside the Montgomery Waters, he wasn't there. But when he is able to have full capacity, he always references them in post and pre-match conferences. He always says how important they are. And he always just throws in little references as well, particularly when he's in the Southwest, you know, an area that he knows well at Bristol City and at Cheltenham, but to an extent Burnley as well. He always seems to be able to find a way to win the fans over. He obviously knows how important they are to the game.
Yeah, his connection, and he, you know, he's very good at this in terms of he's able to pattern recognize and say really original things. You know, about whether it's geography based, even down to, there was one occasion last season where he wanted to come out and make a point of thanking the bus driver, the coach driver he inherited at Shrewsbury, because of the way he takes corners. And that he doesn't make you feel sick, you know, when you just get into it. And all these little things that go into a game. He's just something original, but it shows an appreciation. That coach driver probably feels really good after getting that name check on the local radio. And, you know, because they played 3 or 4 away games in a short space of time. And Cotterill was almost making the point that, listen, this guy's played a part. He's, you know, just the fact that we're not getting off the coach feeling sick at the ground because of the way he drives and how carefully he takes corners and things like that. This is like, you know, people are feeling recognised because his observational skills and his ability to pattern recognise the influence that everybody has in different ways and honour it and make them feel recognised is, you know, it obviously buys a lot of goodwill and a lot of, you know, sentiment.
Across a lot of his jobs, you know, he's made a fast start. He's done brilliantly at Shrewsbury, as we pointed out and highlighted, but things have gone a little sour later on, perhaps. What is it that tends to go wrong, do you think? Is Steve Cotterill the sort of manager who is too rigid? Is he not able to adapt? Or does his influence and his meticulousness eventually wear off with players?
It's an interesting one because I think possibly he doesn't necessarily anticipate play. He's not a manager. Talk about he's not mind-body focused, so he's not necessarily able to put himself into the minds of his players. He probably doesn't know sometimes when he's driving too hard and players are becoming a little bit drained and exhausted, and he just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, and possibly doesn't anticipate what's going on in his players' minds quickly enough that certain damage is done. Also, potentially logistics might be an issue for him in terms of, you know, how to execute things. He just drives forward. He doesn't think about what's the, you know, the best logistical way. And it's accountability to other people and stuff like that. Structures, general sort of structures of the way, the methodical way things should be done, or, you know, the sort of values by which we make our decisions in that sense. And I think this is where Aaron Wilbraham, which I believe this is the first time he's had him as an assistant, complements Cotterill really well. He really does. From what I can say, as the two personality types, from what I've seen of Wilbraham, I think he really complements Cotterill. So I think that hopefully we'll see, you know, them working together as a management team might mean that doesn't, the problems that have surfaced in past jobs won't necessarily surface quite as quickly in this job at Shrewsbury.
One man that he's going to meet this season is Michael Duff, who, of course, took Cheltenham up. And Steve Cotterill signed Michael Duff for Burnley. He's credited, I think, by most Burnley fans for maybe laying the foundations for what Owen Coyle did. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Owen Coyle has sort of been found out a little bit in his jobs after that. And it's probably what Cotterill did, the hard work that Cotterill put in, that really helped to elevate Burnley. And the signing of Michael Duff, obviously, in particular, proving inspirational. And Duff, of course, now making a really good career as a manager himself.
Yeah, and I mean, I do remember the Cotterill years at Burnley, and I did think he had a really good tenure there. You know, we've got different expectations of Burnley nowadays, but I think he was breaking the mould at the time, you know, when he was in charge there. And Michael Duff, yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that goes back to their time at Cheltenham when Cotterill brought Cheltenham into the Football League. Duff was his captain. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic when they come up. There's a connection I hadn't made. So, yeah, you know, again, it's... Michael Duff's had the benefit of a lot of good experience, you know, having played in 8 different divisions and for so many solid managers. And I'm sure he counts Steve Cotterill as one of his biggest influences.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. So Shrewsbury will be playing Cheltenham at some point. They'll also be hoping to collect 3 points against them. Shrewsbury were really good in the second half of the season. They made some very interesting signings as well. What do you expect from the Shrews this season? Because at times, Cotterill's been accused of being a bit gung-ho, and I'd say we're probably falling on the positive side of the gung-ho fence rather than the negative side. But Sam Ricketts' tenure was one where the fans were often bored, were often speaking about the negative football as well. Frustrated, I guess, is probably a more appropriate word. This feels like, under Cotterill, it's a very different style of play. Lots of new players to settle in. Do you fancy them for a top half finish this season?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I really don't. I think just based on the standards last season, they would have finished in the top half over an entire season. Obviously, it's going to be a very, very competitive division. There's so many big clubs and big name managers in there, you know, and they can't all keep winning every week. But I think Steve Cotterill's experience, certainly, you know, if he wasn't so experienced and hadn't been around the block so much at this level and the level above, then, you know, you might ask questions about the consistency and stuff like that. But I don't think there's anything that's going to present itself this season that will faze Cotterill. And like I say, he's still got goodwill in the bank. It's not like a manager that's, you know, this still feels like the beginning of his tenure. And it still feels like that, you know, you talk about cycles and there's still so much ahead to come. And, you know, so I don't see why not. The Shrewsbury can't have a positive season. They'd be nowhere near where they were last season for much of the campaign, because even when they got the results, the start had been sort of so difficult that they never quite broke clear of, you know, they got up to say 16th in the table and just seemed to stay in that same position for the entire season. I think, you know, from the outset this season, they'll be looking to set different standards right from the beginning. You get a first mover advantage and you know, you start a season well, motivation takes care of itself at that point because you just have to look at the league table. So it'd be interesting to see how they start. I don't see why they won't finish in the top half.
And with a less cluttered fixture list, that should benefit Cotterill, shouldn't it? You've talked about maybe his problems, you know, with logistics, but more time on the training ground between games, that's surely going to be beneficial under him.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because I think Wilbraham coped with the logistics really well, and Cotterill coped with the turnarounds really well because, you know, there's so little time in terms of turnaround, so much time when you're in a hospital bed. So he's able to go through whatever his process was, no problem, during those times between matches. Whereas now I think there'll be a lot more distractions. So the more elongated season he will prefer it now that he's back on the training ground, because I do think he could easily be distracted and stretched or pulled in different places if it was a season like last season. So, yeah, I'd see nothing but positives, really.